guys already can see the heart and the fibrous pericardium. Let's see if we can turn this on. Okay, there's your heart in the pericardium. You can see the diaphragm, which sits on the base of the heart. The apex of the heart sits on the diaphragm. That's what I should say. You can see the liver down here below it. And see the right lung. You see the left lung. The left phrenic nerve, as it comes in down to the diaphragm, controls your rates of breathing. And the right phrenic nerve, as it goes down to the diaphragm also. And then the internal thoracic arteries. Here's the starch right there. Okay. Do the next layer down. Okay. You got the left thoracic artery again. You got the pulmonary trunk. Remember, the heart has two exit points for the blood, right? It has the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. And they both go through semilunar valves. Okay, you have the aortic valve and you got the pulmonary valve. Okay, this is the pulmonary trunk. If you look up and to the left, well, then you can see the ascending aorta right above it, right to the left of it. There's your ascending aorta as it comes out of the heart. So you got two big vessels coming out of the heart where blood's being pumped out away from the heart. That's your aorta and your pulmonary trunk. Okay, you do need to know both of those. And again, you have the rest of the heart with the pericardium surrounding it. This is the left phrenic nerve again as it goes down the diaphragm. This is the fibrous pericardium. Again, the pericardium surrounds the heart. They cut it off and they peeled it apart. And it shows a heart underneath. Remember, you have two layers of pericardium. It's like take a balloon and you put your fist in the balloon. There's two layers around your fist. There's one layer that's close to your fist. There's one layer that's outside of it. Okay. The parietal is one away from the organ. The visceral is the one touching the organ. Okay. So you have your parietal pericardium and your visceral pericardium. The visceral pericardium is still left around the heart. Okay. You have your ascending aorta, which you talked about, and then the left vagus nerve, which controls the heart rate. Okay. And going down a little bit deeper, you can see the heart now. Okay. Let's go through this is coming up through the heart. This is the aortic arch. Remember, the aorta comes out from the heart, comes up, and then it arches. And then it starts to go down. So you have an ascending aorta, which comes directly out of the heart. You have the aortic arch, then you have the descending aorta. Okay? As it goes down, it goes through the thoracic cavity, where it comes to the thoracic aorta. Then it passes through the diaphragm. Once it's passed through the diaphragm, it's called the abdominal aorta. And then it splits into your iliac vessels, iliac arteries. So there's the aortic arch. This is the ascending aorta coming directly out of the heart. This is the right auricle. That's that flap over the right ventricle. So underneath that is your right ventricle. This is the right coronary artery that supplies blood to the heart. You have a right and a left just below the aorta. It does not branch out of the aorta, but comes around and circles it inferior to the aorta. Then you have your right ventricle and you have your left ventricle. Okay? It's not a real good separation of the two. You can see the right ventricle to the right side, left ventricle to the left side. You have your left coronary artery, which is just a little dot right there. It branches off the aorta. You have your left auricle, which is your left atrium, and you have the pulmonary trunk. You take your aorta and your pulmonary trunk. Okay. Go to the next layer down. If there's questions, just let me know. But we talked about this stuff last time or last lecture. All right, coming out from the aorta. You can see your aortic arch again coming up right here. The first vessel off the aortic arch following the blood flow is your brachiocephalic trunk. And that's this right here. This is a brachiocephalic trunk. The second one off the aorta is your left common carotid artery. That's this right here. And the third one is the left subclavian artery. That's the blue right there. Those are the three vessel arteries you need to know. You have the aorta, the ascending aorta, as you have the arch. The first one's a brachiocephalic trunk. The next one coming off is the left common carotid. One of that is the left subclavian. And then you have your right common carotid artery branching off of those right there. The right subclavian artery. We did those. They have the right coronary artery, which is blood supply to the heart. The right marginal artery, you can see that below the apex of the heart, along the diaphragmatic layer. You have the anterior interventricular artery, which runs between the ventricles, between the right and left ventricles. You have the diagonal branch of the anterior interventricular artery. You have the left marginal artery, again, all supplying blood to the heart. You can see the pulmonary trunk. If you're looking at the heart in the human body, the pulmonary trunk is always to the left on the patient. So you're right. As you're looking at it, to your right-hand side, the left side of the patient. Okay, because the heart leans towards the patient's left. Okay, and that covers all those. All right, so there's the heart. You can see the heart dead center here. Can't miss it. That's the heart. This is the diaphragm that's been cut away right here that the heart sits on top of. This is your fibrous pericardium. So you have a this is your pericardial sac that surrounds the heart. Okay, so here's the aorta coming up. This is your aortic arch. Yeah, the aorta comes up and arches over. Okay, the first one is a brachiocephalic trunk, like we said. That's the first artery or vessel off of the aortic arch. So you need to know these three: the brachiocephalic trunk, then the left common carotid artery, then the left subclavian artery. Those are the three branches, main vessels off of the aortic arch. Now behind the aortic arch is the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava empties blood into what? What part of the heart?
The right atrium.
Right atrium, perfect. Okay, there's three vessels that feed blood into the right atrium. The superior vena cava, what else?
Inferior vena cava.
Inferior vena cava and the cavernous sinus. Those three vessels dump into the right atrium. Okay. All right, again, looking at the heart from the top part. Remember that the aorta is always to the left. The pulmonary trunk is always right. As you're looking at the heart, it's positioned in the body. You see the big hole there, the superior vena cava. Again, that feeds into the right atrium right here. Okay. You have your ascending aorta. It goes to the aortic valve. You have your right auricle, which covers the right ventricle, right atrium, I'm sorry. And then you have your right ventricle. You have the pulmonary trunk. You have the left ventricle. You have the left auricle, which covers the left atrium. And you have the left pulmonary veins, which are blood coming back from the lungs. Remember, veins go into the heart, arteries go away from the heart. So a couple quick questions. Does the pulmonary trunk have oxygenated or deoxygenated blood in it?
Deoxygenated.
Deoxygenated. Does the pulmonary vein have oxygenated or deoxygenated?
Oxygenated.
Oxygenated. And the aorta, oxygenated or deoxygenated?
Oxygenated.
Perfect. That will be on your final exam. Good, perfect. And go to the next one. Yeah, again, the heart again. And you see the superior vena cava draining into the right atrium. You have the ascending aorta coming out of the heart. And I think you can see, almost see the valve, the aortic valve in there. You have the pulmonary trunk, feeds into your pulmonary arteries, goes to the lungs. Pulmonary veins come back from the lungs. The right coronary artery, right, that supplies blood to the heart. the right marginal arteries, the interventricular arteries, and then branches of the anterior interventricular artery, the great cardiac vein brings blood back into the superior vena cava. The circumflex artery wraps around the top part of the heart. The left marginal artery going down the side. This is the left pulmonary veins. Like, you can't see the right pulmonary vein. They're behind that other area. Again, those are the ones coming back from the lungs. So that carries oxygenated blood. And the two main vessels that supply oxygen to the heart is your right coronary artery, you can see right here, and your left coronary artery, which you can see right here. There you go. That's that big branch. So those are two branches that supply the most blood to the heart: the left coronary artery and the right coronary artery. All right, looking at the heart again. You see the superior vena cava. Okay, blood flow back from everything above the diaphragm flows into the superior vena cava into the right atrium. The ascending aorta pumps blood out to the aortic arch, the descending aorta to the thoracic aorta to the abdominal aorta, and then it breaks into the iliac arteries. But that's your aorta that goes through. That's the systemic system. Pumps blood to the rest, most of the rest of the body, except for the lungs. The right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. Okay. Pulmonary trunk branches into the right and left pulmonary arteries. The interventricular artery again between the ventricles, right and left ventricles. Digital branches of the interventricular artery. You have the left marginal artery, the circumflex artery as it wraps around the top, the greater cardiac vein, the left coronary, we said the left coronary artery already, and the pulmonary veins. Remember, pulmonary veins are blood coming back into the heart, but they're carrying oxygen from the lungs. Okay. Again, looking at the heart, a little more detail there. You have the superior vena cava. You have the ascending aorta. You have the right coronary artery, and you have the pulmonary trunk. You have your interventricular artery, and then the branches of it, the digital branches of it. You have your pulmonary vein coming back to the left atrium. You have the left coronary artery, supplying blood to the heart. You have the left marginal artery, the greater cardiac vein taking blood away from the heart, the circumflex artery, and a digital branch of the anterior interventricular artery. Okay. Again, looking a little bit different, these are your pulmonary veins. You can see the right side and the left side. This is blood coming back from the lungs that feed into the left atrium. You have the coronary sinus. Again, that's the one that feeds into the middle, of the right atrium. You have the superior vena cava on the top, inferior vena cava on the bottom, and the coronary sinus feeding into the center of it. Okay, those are the only three vessels that feed in directly into the right atrium. Then you have your posterior vein of the left ventricle. You have the middle cardiac vein, bringing it back to the coronary sinus. You have the posterior interventricular artery. Again, this is on the back of the heart. You have the right marginal artery, the right coronary artery, the inferior vena cava, and the superior vena cava. Again, it's looking at the inferior view of the heart. So we're just kind of rotating it around. All right, now you can see the valves really good. Let me get something away from there. You can see your pulmonary trunk. This is this area right in here. And inside the trunk, you see the pulmonary semilunar valve. I can see, just get that blue stuff away from it for a second. Okay. Again, you can see all the folds over here and all the folds inside the aortic also. They're tricuspid valves, but they're semilunar valves. Okay. Both the pulmonary is a semilunar valve and the aortic semilunar valve. So there's your pulmonary trunk and your pulmonary valve. This is the ascending aorta and your aortic semilunar valve. This is the tricuspid valve. See, there's 3 cusps with it. You see 1, 2, and then 3 cusps. So this is a tricuspid valve. So where is this located? Where is the tricuspid valve located?
Right atrium.
Between the right atrium and the right ventricle. It prevents blood from backing up and flowing back into the right atrium when the ventricle contracts into the pulmonary trunk. And you see the bicuspid valve. So this bicuspid valve is located between what?
Left atrium and left ventricle.
Perfect. Between the left atrium and left ventricle. What's another name for the bicuspid valve that you're going to see in your medical clinics? That's your mitral valve. You have MVP, you'll see a lot of patients' charts, mitral valve prolapse. That's when these 2 valves don't close completely and you get blood backing up into the atrium. That causes a heart murmur. Okay, that's when that can be fatal. If blood can back up, bacteria in the blood can back up and circulate around and back up and stick to the heart rather than flow through it in your bloodstream. So that's the problem with the mitral valve prolapse. That's what we use antibiotics prophylaxis when we do patients like that. Okay, so you know what those are? Bicuspid, tricuspid valve, we're good there. Okay, tricuspid valve. Okay, this is the papillary muscle. Remember, the papillary muscle contains these little strings. Those little strings are called the chordae tendineae. What it does, the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscle prevent the valve from inversion. Prevent that valve going back up once it closes to extending back up into the atrium and allowing blood to flow from the ventricle to the atrium. And papillary valve and chordae tendineae are present in both right and left sides. So you got it from both the bicuspid valve and the tricuspid valve. Okay, you see your ascending aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Okay, papillary muscles, chordae tendineae. This is a cusp of the tricuspid valve. So you know you're in the right ventricle and the right atrium. That's the valve between them. And those are pectinate muscles. Pectinate muscles are on the right and left sides of the heart, and they're muscles that are kind of zigzagged around it, and they allow the heart to contract with a lot more force because of all the different patterns of the muscle, so it constricts 100% around it rather than just one direction. It's kind of concentric and constricts the whole entire ventricle. So that's what the pectinate muscles look like. This is the opening of your coronary sinus. So if you see the opening of the coronary sinus, where is this? What's this structure right here? Where's it opening into?
Right atrium.
Right atrium, because the coronary sinus feeds into the right atrium along with the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The fossa ovalis is the opening of the heart. Okay, what is this? What is the frame? That's when it's open, is a fossa ovalis. Okay, when it that's when it's closed over and sealed. When it's open, what's it called? Okay, the fossa ovalis is the closing of it. If the hole does not close, or when it's in the fetal circulation, what is that opening called before it's closed?
Valley, foramen ovale.
Foramen ovale, perfect. And what does it allow you to do? What does it connect? The foramen ovale connects what to what?
The right and left ventricles.
Atriums. Collects right and left atrium, but the same purpose. It allows blood to flow and bypass the lungs. So it goes to the right atrium, goes to the left atrium, goes to the left ventricle. It does not go to the right ventricle, doesn't go up into the lungs and back because the lungs aren't being used. The mother's breathing for the fetus. The lungs are not being used until the baby is born. Okay, so blood's not flowing to them. So it's going through this foramen ovale. Upon birth, that foramen ovale closes and becomes the fossa ovalis. That's the remnant you see inside of there. Okay, if it doesn't close, you get what's called a blue baby, where they're not getting proper oxygenation of the blood because they're not going to their lungs. They're breathing for themselves. And you got your superior vena cava draining at the top and your ascending aorta coming out of the top also. Your superior vena cava and your ascending aorta. All right. This is the heart that's kind of splayed open. And let's take a look at it kind of closely here. Here's your aortic semilunar valve, because this is split right down the middle. So you got the aorta on both sides. Okay, it's kind of a weird looking dissection. But there's your aortic semilunar valve. This is the left atrium. This is the left ventricle right here. Okay, this is the right ventricle right there. Because now you're not oriented any specific way now because the heart's split. How can you tell this is the right atrium and this is the right ventricle and this is the left ventricle? What's the easiest way to tell?
The thickness of
What?
the left ventricle.
The what of it?
The thickness of the
Perfect.
tissue.
Exactly. Look how thick those muscles are on the left ventricle. Those muscles are huge. This is a muscle thickness here on the left ventricle. This one here and this one here. This is your left ventricle. Okay. Right ventricle, you see how thin the muscles are in comparison on this side here. So your right ventricle has a lot thinner muscles than the left ventricles. Okay, that's exactly where you're at. So here's your left atrium, your left ventricle, the interventricular septum as it divides the left and right ventricles. This is the right ventricle. These are the papillary muscles. Again, papillary muscles and chordae tendineae are in both valves, the bicuspid valve and the tricuspid valve, so right and left sides. Here's your chordae tendineae, the little strings that connect it. Okay, and here's your bicuspid valve. The bicuspid valve is in the left ventricle, between the left atrium and the left ventricle. It's also called the mitral valve. And here's your tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve is between the right atrium and the right ventricle. And again, you can see the chordae tendineae underneath that and the papillary muscles. Here's your chordae tendineae. Well, I can't see because it gets all clouded over. Okay, but there's your right atrium. And you can see the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles underneath that. Okay, any questions on that so far?
What was it that you said on Wednesday that the right ventricle had that the left did not?
A moderator band. The moderator band is only found in the right ventricle, not in the left. And what it is, it's a band of muscles at the bottom and is there to prevent the over expansion of the heart when that blood fills back in, because the muscles aren't as thick as the left ventricle. So when blood fills back in, a lot of force builds up and that prevents the heart from expanding too much. That's the moderator band. That's found only in the right ventricle. Is that the question? Okay, perfect. All right, so let's take the quiz here. Yeah, that's it. All right, what is the highlighted structure?
Fossa ovalis.
Fossa ovalis, right? That's where the foraminal valley situates. It allows the blood to bypass the lungs. Okay. What artery is highlighted? It's coming up the side of the heart there.
Is it the anterior interventricular?
Could be, but it's a little thin for that. I'd say it's a branch of it. It's either a digital branch or the right marginal.
Well, it would be the
digital branch of the anterior ventricular.
It's on the left side, so it couldn't be the right marginal.
Yeah, it's on the left side. So let's go with the digital branch of the anterior ventricular. It's right where the anterior ventricular just runs to the left of that. So it looks like a little smaller than that. Correct. Okay, so the diagonal branch of the anterior interventricular artery. Okay, what vessel is highlighted there? That would be that's not interventricular.
Right marginal artery?
That would probably be the right marginal artery. That comes across the bottom there. Perfect. What structure is highlighted here? And it's kind of hard to see sometimes the highlight there. But this is the what? First of all, what side of the heart is that?
Right.
Right side of the heart. So is it the right? It's either the right ventricle.
Right auricle.
Right, yeah, right ventricle is right here, right?
Right
So it has
auricle.
to be right auricle, which is the flap that overlies the right atrium. That's what it looks like. Oops, check answer. Okay, what are those little stringy things that connect the papillary muscle to the valve?
Chordae tendineae.
Chordae tendineae. And you can see the papillary muscles right below it here, connection to the valve. All right, what is that? That is the, okay, again, I'll turn the highlight off. You see the opening there. So is it, first of all, look at it. Is it blood coming into the heart or going away from the heart?
Going
How do you
into.
know? It's going into, well, how do you know?
Because it's on the right atrium or right side.
No. Well, it's on the left side, I think. It's on the left side. But remember, the only two things coming out of the heart are what? The aorta and the pulmonary trunk.
Yeah.
And you can see those right here. Here's the aorta. Here's the pulmonary trunk. So you know it's coming into the heart. Does that make sense? Okay, so you know that if it's pointing to an opening, you know it's coming into the heart. It's not the aorta or the pulmonary trunk. So it has to come in. So that's a vein. Veins come into the heart.
Would it be the coronary artery? No.
No, it has to be a vein.
Pulmonary vein?
It's coming
Left pulmonary vein.
Yeah, the left pulmonary vein?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it has to be. It has to be a left pulmonary vein. Because you know it cannot be an artery. See, when you're taking your nursing exams, you have to just eliminate things. And then you get down to one or two answers, that's correct. So you know it has to be coming into the heart because you see the two huge ones that are coming out of the heart, the atrium and the pulmonary trunk. And those are the only two coming out of the heart. Nothing else comes out of the heart. So if you have another vessel, just like this one here, okay, that's a vein, has to be. And this is a vein. It's on the left side, so it has to be your left pulmonary vein. Comes back in here and dumps into the left ventricle, because here's your left auricle. So this is dumping into the left ventricle, which is what the pulmonary vein does. So that'll be your left pulmonary vein. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because you can't memorize everything. So you have to make a logical approach sometimes and think things through. Because when we get into blood vessels in the next section here, there are so many of them you can't memorize them all. You can't. But you can be able to think and eliminate certain ones by logically thinking it through. Okay, what is identify the highlighted vessel? Again, this is looking at the what side of the heart? Looks like that's hard to say what we're looking at. I'm having a hard time orienting. But this looks like your aorta and your pulmonary trunk. So this could be. What's that?
Pulmonary vein?
Could be the. Or this could be a pulmonary vein, and the superior vena cava. So we'll go with pulmonary vein, but it's really oriented kind of funny. The superior vena cava. Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, aorta, and pulmonary trunk. The heart's kind of rotated. You got to rotate to the left to line up the right ways. If you're looking at this, would be your superior vena cava. This would be the inferior vena cava. This would be your aorta. This would be your pulmonary trunk. It's a funny angle. It's hard to tell, so I wouldn't pull that on you. But this is a superior vena cava. What is a highlighted structure? Turn our highlights back on. Okay, it's something coming off the bottom here. All right. You see the ventricles down here, right? Right ventricle, left ventricle. So it can't be those. So it's either the left auricle or the right auricle. Which one would you say it is?
Left.
Left, on the left side. Yeah, there's no way to tell that's the left auricle just by looking at it, but if you identify the other structures, you can tell it's not them. So that should be the left auricle. Again, that's a real hard picture to identify it from. Okay. This guy here, there's your structure. First of all, here's your left ventricle, right ventricle comes up. And again, what's on the left, what's on the right? So these two structures right here, what's this one and what's this one? This one on the left is called what?
Aorta. Ascending aorta.
All right, that's the ascending aorta. This is called the
pulmonary trunk.
Pulmonary trunk. So this right here is the
arch.
Aortic arch. Perfect. All right, look at that vessel right there. Identify the vessel. Let me be right back. The dog just opened my door real quick. Oh, pumpernickel. All right, we're back. All right, so would that be a circumflex artery, left marginal artery, greater cardiac vein, or superior vena cava? You can see the superior vena cava. That's right here. So you know it's not that. And it's an artery that's going around. It looks like, because here's your carotid arteries right here, right and left, as that branches off. And that looks like it branches off there. That could be the circumflex artery.
Well, the circumflex would be on top, like as you were superior to that, correct?
Mm,
That kind of looks like it would be the cardiac vein.
great cardiac vein. Let's try that. Yep, great cardiac vein. Because I don't see the circumflex artery. It should be right in this area here. Or coming, that's it right here. That's the circumflex artery on this side, but it doesn't wrap around yet. Okay, so that's your great cardiac vein, blood coming back from the heart, back into the heart. Perfect. All right. These are what? These are where they're normally flat against it, but they're pulled away to show the heart. So those are what, that's what structure? Diaphragm, lung, or heart?
Left lungs?
Lungs.
That's the left lung. Perfect. You got it. Left lung. Maybe, if I can mark it. Okay, perfect. All right. Which vessel is highlighted here?
Pulmonary trunk.
Pulmonary trunk. Okay. Remember, this is your left ventricle here. And the aorta, and you rotate the heart a little bit. This is the aorta. This is your left pulmonary trunk. Oh, your pulmonary trunk, I'm sorry. Pulmonary trunk. Okay. And again, you see aorta, your superior vena cava, your pulmonary trunk. I see marginal arteries on the bottom here. And what's this opening right here?
Vena cava.
This is superior vena cava right here, that big opening. So this would
pulmonary
be,
veins.
this would be your pulmonary vein coming back into the left atrium. It's on the left side. So the left pulmonary veins. Okay, coming into the left atrium with oxygenated blood. All right. Okay, look at that valve. Okay, does it have 3 cusps or 2 cusps?
3.
3. Okay. So this is that's a tricuspid valve. Let's turn on the highlight. So we'll show you exactly where it is. Okay, that's tricuspid. This has 2 cusps. This one here, this is your bicuspid valve. This is your aortic semilunar valve. This is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, so this should be your tricuspid valve. And tricuspid valve is between the right atrium and the right ventricle. What vessel is highlighted? Boy, it's hard to see what's coming off that. It's coming off the, it looks like to me it's coming off the brachiocephalic trunk. So it's not the aortic arch is down here. Where's my line? Right here. Here's your aortic arch.
Subclavian.
The right subclavian, the right common carotid. So this is the brachiocephalic trunk right here. So it'd be the right common carotid, the right subclavian. Subclavian should go below the clavicle. So this should be your right common carotid. Maybe. Like I said, there's a lot of arteries and veins in here. So right common carotid. Nope, right subclavian. I guess it branches off and it's cut off short. It's just hard to see. That's your right subclavian artery. Good. Okay, what structure is highlighted there?
Right lung.
Right lung. We should get that one. Right lung. Which two vessels are branches of the highlighted vessel? What's highlighted is the brachiocephalic trunk. So what branches off of that?
The subclavian and common carotid.
The right common carotid. Where are we at? Right common carotid and right subclavian.
Yes.
Okay, right common carotid and right subclavian artery. Perfect. And which two veins unite to form the highlighted vessel? The highlighted vessel was the
That was the
superior vena cava, right? That was one that had a weird angle on it. But that's the superior vena cava going to the right atrium. Okay, so what two veins form the superior vena cava? I would say the brachiocephalic veins coming into it from the right and left sides from your superior vena cava. Perfect. Okay, so you got your brachiocephalic, you have the brachiocephalic artery or trunk coming up. So you have the brachiocephalic veins feeding into the superior vena cava and back into the right atrium. Identify the three branches of the highlighted vessel. Okay, the aortic arch. Remember what there were three branches? The first one coming off is the,
Ascending.
no, this is the aorta here, and these three vessels right here above it coming off. This one here, and this one just going to the right of it.
Oh.
Okay, this is the brachiocephalic trunk. The next one is the left common carotid. The next one is the left subclavian. Those are three you need to know that come off the aortic arch. So brachiocephalic, left common carotid, left subclavian. Those three. Okay, and one more. See if we can get through this. All right, again, there's the heart. You can see your superior vena cava in the background. This is your ascending aorta right here coming up. Okay, this is the aortic arch. And you got your three branches again. You got your brachiocephalic trunk, your left common carotid, and your left subclavian artery. So which two vessels branch from that? So what branches from the left common carotid artery? It's not the superior vena cava. Right and left posterior cerebral arteries, left internal and external carotid arteries, left internal and external jugular veins. I'd say we're still on the left side of the heart. So left internal and external carotid arteries. Because it has to be arteries that branch. It can't be veins that branch from that. Correct. All right. Any questions on that? Now go on to blood vessels. Blood vessels, a huge amount of blood vessels on these in the human body. There we go. We're not froze up. Perfect. All right. Show our labels. Only one thing on that one. Oh, there we go. I knew there were more than one thing on that. All right, there's gonna be a huge amount of information on these. Okay, I don't expect you to find little detailed things, but I expect you to generally be able to identify through the process of elimination what has to be in that area. Okay, like you should know the temporalis muscle from the temporal side of the skull. So here's your temporalis muscle. Okay, connects to the mandible, works in conjunction with the masseter muscle to close the jaw for chewing force. Okay, so there's your temporalis. This is the disc of the TMJ, that little tiny blue area there. That's where the drawing a blank on the line. Coronary process of the mandible articulates with the temporal fossa of the skull and forms your temporal mandibular joint. Okay, and that's the disc that's inside of that rubs on. Okay, like the meniscus of your knee or your shoulder disc. You have a temporal deep artery. You see that little blue dot right there. You have the orbicularis oculi. Orbicularis oculi, you all know, is a circular muscle that surrounds the eye. What's the name of the circular muscle that surrounds the mouth?
Orbicularis oris.
Orbicularis oris, perfect. Okay, this is the coronary process of the mandible. Where the coronary process is anterior to the condyle. Okay, you see the parotid duct. Okay, this is where the parotid gland releases secretions into the oral cavity. Parotid gland is the largest gland, okay, in the body. The zygomatic is major muscle. Comes from the zygomatic arch. The facial artery. See the little blue line that runs up the side of the face, going across the mandible. That's your facial artery. Facial vein runs right along it. There's a facial artery. There's a facial vein. All right. Then the submandibular gland is a gland below the mandible. Okay. Cutaneous branch of the cervical plexus of your nervous system. The sternocleidoid mastoid muscle. Okay. Attaches to the mastoid bone, which is distal to the external acoustic meatus. Attaches to the clavicle. And attaches to the sternum. That's 3 appointment attaches, 3 attachment sites. That's what's called the sternocleidoid mastoid muscle. These are three sites. Your internal jugular vein, your external jugular vein, your retromandibular vein behind the mandible, the condyle of the mandible, which forms the temporal mandibular joint with the fossa of the temporal bone, the superficial temporal artery, okay, and then the temporalis muscle. And we'll go a little layer deeper. Okay, orbicularis oculi, circular muscle that surrounds the eye. The lateral pterygoid and the medial pterygoid surround the temporal mandibular joint. This is your lateral pterygoid, runs on the side of it. The medial pterygoid, I don't think they show that on this one. Yeah, I can see it right there. There it is. This is your lateral pterygoid. This is the medial pterygoid. Okay. Again, see just below it. This is to the medial surface on the outside. Okay, this is a parotid duct. This is where the parotid gland enters the oral cavity, and it's just buckled to the second permanent molar. So the parotid gland goes through the parotid duct and enters into the oral cavity just outside the second molar. The buccal muscle is the muscle used to play the clarinet, play the trombone, the trumpet. Okay, how you put your lips together and blow. That puts to the sides of the external cavity there. The inferior alveolar artery. Okay, so see the artery there? It runs just below the border of the mandible. So it's your inferior alveolar artery. The facial artery. How it comes across. Digastric muscle. Remember, the digastric muscle has 2 bellies, an anterior belly and a posterior belly. Okay, you see it goes through that little sling right there. So that's a digastric muscle. The submandibular gland. Yeah, this is the gland below the mandible. There's your submandibular gland. Okay. Anus cervicalis, where it makes a V section there. Your internal jugular vein. This doesn't show the external one. This is your internal jugular vein. Your omohyoid muscle. Again, remember that one has 2 bellies also, goes through the sling there. An anterior and a posterior omohyoid muscle. That was the medial pterygoid we already talked about. Then you have the occipital artery. It goes to the back of the brain, occipital lobe. You have your external carotid artery. You have your posterior auricular artery. Make sure we stay on that so we can see it. Your maxillary artery. Again, they're very tiny ones to try to observe in that area. Your deep temporal artery. Your superficial temporal artery. And your temporalis muscle. What's up? Okay, let's go a little bit deeper here. Do the dissection going down. All right, start with your temporalis muscle. The superficial temporal arteries going along the side. The deep temporal arteries, which you only see little bits of those. The parotid duct, which connects to the parotid gland. The parotid duct connects the parotid gland to the intraoral cavity. Buccinator muscle, it's on the sides of the cheek there. The inferior alveolar artery runs below the mandible. That's what innervates into the teeth on the lower part of your arch. Okay, you got your, make sure. The hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve number 12. And the digastric muscle. Again, two bellies of digastric muscle. The external carotid artery. You also have the internal carotid artery. Adjacent to that, you'll see that. But this is your external carotid artery right here. See the blue markings. Then your superior thyroid artery, feeding your thyroid gland. Since it kind of loops around where the thyroid is located. The common carotid artery. Vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, controls your heart rate. The ansus cervicalis again. There's your internal carotid artery. The occipital artery, going to the occipital lobe. Okay. The posterior auricular artery. Your maxillary artery. Where am I at? Right there. So you're feeding up the top of the maxilla. And the middle meningeal artery. Just that tiny blue dot there. Okay. Those are locations of some of the arteries in the head and neck area. Okay, lateral view of it. Let's start with, start at the top. Digastric belly, the posterior belly of the digastric muscle. Remember, there's two lobes of that muscle, two bellies. This is branches of the middle meningeal artery on the side here. Okay. You have the dura mater. The dura mater is the outer layer that under the bone that helps protect the brain. Okay, there's three layers: the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. They get thinner as they go along. That's the dura mater, the outer layer. Your transverse sinus going between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. This is your vertebral artery. Vertebral artery goes through the foramen magnum. This is your spinal cord. The denticulate ligaments, which are connecting between the vertebrae. You got your dorsal root and your dorsal root ganglia. That's the swelling where you have the cell bodies for the sensory functions going into the spinal cord. Okay, your superior thyroid artery, your external carotid artery, and the submandibular gland. You see the submandibular really well here on this one. There's your submandibular gland. Again, you got your facial artery. You got your buccinator muscle. That's the medial pterygoid and lateral pterygoid. Medial pterygoid is inferior to the lateral pterygoid. And there's your lateral pterygoid. Those are the muscles that surround the temporomandibular joint. There we go. Looking at the top of the skull, you have the dura mater, which surrounds the entire thing. That's your dura mater. It's a hard casing around the entire skull. Your superior sagittal sinus runs right between the right and left hemispheres. You got the middle meningeal arteries, branches of it, that branch around the cranium, and the arachnoid granulations. All right, more of a dissect looking at the back of the head here. Okay. And we have the left cerebral hemisphere. You see the right cerebral hemisphere is surrounded by the dura mater. You have the confluence of the sinuses where they join together. The left cerebellar hemisphere, that's your cerebellum. Okay. Accessory nerve number 11. The accessory nerve is the cranial nerve number 11. You have your spinal cord coming off of that. Again, you have your dorsal roots and your dorsal root ganglia, which are the swellings, where the cell bodies are located. You got your vertebral artery, which goes through the foramen magnum, branches off. You got the transverse sinus, coming off from your sagittal sinus. The sagittal sinus goes between the right and left cerebellar halves. The transverse sinus goes between the cerebellum and the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Okay. And a side view of it. All right. The cerebrum is covered with arachnoid matter still. We took the dura mater off. You can see the dura mater on the side here. Forms a case. You cut through that. Now you have the dura mater. We cut through that. Then we'll have the pia mater around the brain. You have the temporalis muscle, the buccinator muscle, the posterior belly of the digastric, okay, dorsal root ganglia, and the vertebral artery. It goes through the foramen magnum and down the vertebral column. The denticular ligaments, which are the fibrous connective tissue that holds the attached between each vertebrae. You have the spinal cord. You have the dorsal roots. The sigmoid sinus. Sigmoid just means S-shaped, so it's a curved sinus. It's a sigmoid sinus. You can see the cerebellum. You see the transverse sinus between the cerebellum and the cerebrum. And you can see the dura mater still there, and the cerebral veins that go across into the from the arachnoid layer. Okay, questions so far? Everybody understanding everything? I know it's a lot. There's a lot of information in this lab here. A lot of blood vessels. It can get a little complicated looking at it. All right, so let's start with, this is the brain cut directly in half. So this is a corpus callosum. Let's start right here with the corpus callosum. What does a corpus callosum do? That's gonna be on your final. What's the, Corpus callosum does what? The corpus callosum connects the right and left cerebrums of the brain. Right? That's the function of the corpus callosum. You have a septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum does what? Separates the first and second ventricles. That's the layer between the first and second ventricles. Okay. You have the anterior cerebral artery. See, it wraps around. This is the third ventricle. Okay, so the lateral ventricles, first and second, flow into the third ventricle. Okay, and where are we at? You have the stalk of the pituitary gland. That's what holds the pituitary gland. Remember, you don't see the pituitary gland because what's the bone? You see where the pituitary gland is connected. What's the bone that encases the pituitary gland? So if you don't dissect it out by removing bone, you pull the brain out and the pituitary gland is left, it's separated. What's
Sella
that bone?
turcica.
Sella turcica, perfect. That surrounds the pituitary gland and allows protection of it. And when you pull the brain out, it leaves that gland behind. But that's the stalk right there where it connects. You have the optic nerve is cranial nerve number 2, your vision. You have the internal carotid artery. You have the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve number 3, and the trochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 4 for auditory. Then you have the tentorium cerebelli. The tentorium cerebelli is a fact that separates the right and left sides of the cerebellum. And you can see the transverse sinus. Okay, again, that's goes between the cerebellum and the cerebral cortex. Here's your cerebellum. Just a part of it there. And your straight sinus, your superior sagittal sinus, right between the left and right sides of the cerebral cortex. The falx cerebri. The falx cerebri separates the right and left hemispheres of the cerebrum. The pineal gland. Pineal gland is located just posterior to the thalamus. Okay, the pineal gland is responsible for your circadian rhythms, your production of melatonin. There's your midbrain, where the thalamus is located, the hypothalamus. Your inferior sagittal sinus, and the corpus callosum again. All right, underside of the brain. These are your olfactory bulbs. Those are the tips of the olfactory nerve and your olfactory tract. That becomes cranial nerve number 1. That's your olfactory nerve, your sense of smell. You have the frontal lobe of your cerebrum. That's where your thought process occurs. Everything takes place. You got the optic nerve, cranial nerve number 2. Okay, that's your vision. This is just in front of the optic, or just anterior to the optic chiasm. The optic chiasm is the crisscross area where you have your optic tract that feeds into the thalamus, into the lateral geniculate nucleus, into the optical area for projection of the brain, projection of the images. All right. Now, if you look at this one here, here's the pituitary gland. This one, they dissected out the bone and cut it away. So when they took the skull out, you still have the pituitary gland. You won't usually see that in brain dissections, but here's your pituitary gland right there. Posterior communicating artery. The vertebral artery comes up through the foramen magnum. The medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is the inferior portion of your brainstem. That's where the spinal cord starts to connect to the brainstem, is your medulla oblongata. Your spinal cord, your cerebellum, temporal lobe of the cerebrum, the pons. Remember, the pons is located, if you look at a side view, your cerebellum, your medulla oblongata, brainstem, and then your pons right across from the cerebellum. Those are the swellings there. Your basilar artery goes right between the pons. The posterior cerebral artery, the internal carotid artery, and your olfactory bulbs again, olfactory bulb and olfactory tract, forming cranial nerve number 1. Okay, going down the vertebral column here. That's the foramen magnum. Foramen magnum literally means big hole. You see the vertebral artery. Let's work your way through the foramen magnum, down through the vertebrae. You have the dorsal root ganglia. Those are the swellings of the dorsal root where the cell bodies are. Your levator scapulae muscles of the neck. Your dorsal root. Spinal cord, and the denticulate ligaments that connect in between each vertebrae. All right, pectoralis minor. Again, the pectoralis major has been dissected out, so you can't see it. Oh, on the other side, here's your pectoralis major. Okay, they take that away, and underneath that, you have your pectoralis minor. Internal intercostal muscles. Okay, the serratus anterior muscles on the side. Get that right where it's supposed to be. There we go. And the external intercostal muscles, more distal to it. So you have your internal intercostal muscles, your external intercostal muscles, and on the side you have your serratus anteriors. These are the ventral rami, ventral roots. Your internal oblique muscles, going along the side. Your transverse abdominis muscle. Okay. That's the one that separates each of the rectus abdominis muscles. The inguinal ligament. You haven't got to that yet. That's where the testes descend down along that ligament. The femoral nerve going down the leg, and the femoral artery going down the leg, and the femoral vein. Remember, arteries, veins, and nerves all run together. Okay? So if you have a femoral artery, you got a femoral nerve, and you got the femoral vein right next to it. Okay? That's when you give injections, you aspirate. Okay? Aspiration means to pull back on the syringe once you put the needle where you want it to be. If blood comes back into it, you usually don't inject it unless you want to go intra-arterial injection. But most blocks, anesthesia, like that, you want to make sure you don't go into an artery or vein. That's why you aspirate, to make sure you're by the nerve, because you're aiming for the nerve, but you got to remember, arteries, veins, and nerves all run together. Rectus abdominis muscles, that's muscles of your abdomen, gives you your six-pack. Your inferior epigastric artery. Your external oblique muscles. Your superior epigastric artery. And your internal thoracic artery. Then you got your internal thoracic vein, right next to the internal thoracic artery. And you got your anterior intercostal artery. And then the pectoralis major and pectoralis minor, when you take that off. Perfect. All right. The anterior thoracic cavity. You have your thymus gland. Again, your butterscotch gland above the heart and anterior to the trachea. You got your parietal pleura around the heart. That's on the outside layer of the pleura. You have your right lung. You have the diaphragm, the big mushroom shape that goes across the entire body cavity there. And then you got the tip of the liver you can see right there. And that little green dot is your gallbladder. That's where bile is stored, released when you have fat in your diet. The falciform ligament helps hold the liver in place. The greater omentum. There's these sheets of fascia we haven't talked about yet. We get to the digestive system. You have the greater omentum, which goes from your stomach down, covers everything, and the lesser omentum goes from the top of the stomach down. It's just this fascia, fat pad that covers everything and protects and isolates everything on the below the stomach for the greater omentum. Because there's your stomach, the pericardial sac surrounding the heart, the internal thoracic artery, and you got your phrenic nerve, your left lung, and your internal thoracic vein. And we'll go down a little deeper here. We'll go down different layers as we dissect it. And you can easily see the trachea on this one. Okay. Trachea is that tube that stays open with the cartilaginous rings that help support it. That's your windpipe. You have your common carotid artery that runs alongside of it. You have the subclavian artery. There's that little dot, just barely see a little green dot diving down to that little blue dot, I'm sorry, diving down there. The cephalic vein. The axillary vein, which is a larger vein going across under the armpit. The brachiocephalic vein. And the superior vena cava, which feeds into the right atrium. Remember, the brachiocephalic vein, right and left, feeds into and make up the superior vena cava. The pericardial sac surrounds the heart. Rest of the diaphragm. See the liver. And what's this green dot right here? What's that little green dot?
Gallbladder.
Gallbladder. Okay. That's going to do it laparoscopically, because you see how it just sits around the surface there. They can go laparoscopic and just cut it out. Okay, because they can easily find it. There's your stomach, below the liver, the brachiocephalic trunk. Remember the aortic arch. The first branch off is the brachiocephalic trunk. Then the left common carotid, and the left subclavian. This is your right lung. Oh, I'm sorry, your left lung. Saying it backwards here. That's your left lung. The phrenic nerve runs down into the diaphragm for breathing. The vagus nerve runs down to the heart for regulation of your heart. The internal thoracic artery the subclavian vein. And there's your thyroid gland, again, the butter-shaped gland. What's this little area right between the two lobes of the thyroid gland called?
Isthmus.
The isthmus. And on the back of the thyroid gland, you have 4 little nodules. What are those? There'll be 4 bumps.
Parathyroid.
Those are the parathyroid gland. Perfect. There's 4 little bumps on the back of the thigh, which is your parathyroid gland. This is your internal jugular vein, right along the sides of the trachea. Let's go down a little deeper here. All right. This is, you can see the trachea a little bit better. Those cartilaginous rings that support it, keep it open, your trachea. Your common carotid artery. Your right brachiocephalic vein. The vagus nerve that runs to the heart. The greater cephalic vein. The left brachiocephalic vein. Okay, remember, the right and left brachiocephalic vein make up the superior vena cava. And here's your superior vena cava. And your superior vena cava feeds into the right atrium of the heart. Your phrenic nerve runs down to the diaphragm for breathing. Right coronary artery. Okay, you have your diaphragm. This is the marginal artery that runs along the apex of the heart. The anterior interventricular artery, where it runs between the right and left ventricles. The pulmonary trunk. Okay, pulmonary trunk branches to the lungs, the right and left pulmonary arteries. Okay, and it's like I said, there's only two vessels that leave the heart: the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. And here's the aorta next to it, right there. You see, it goes up the ascending aorta and then forms your aortic arch. And then what's the first branch off the aortic arch? The brachiocephalic trunk. You can also see your axillary vein, subclavian vein, subclavian artery, your thyroid gland, your butterfly-shaped gland, and your internal jugular vein. And one more layer here. Can I go? Yeah, layer 4. All right, thyroid gland again, butterfly-shaped gland, trachea, axillary artery, axillary vein, brachiocephalic trunk, first branch off, the primary bronchi. So the lungs have been removed here. Okay, so you see the trachea up above here, and this trachea tube comes down and this branches at what's called the carina here. And it branches into the right lung and the left lung. So those are what are called the primary bronchus. Your primary bronchus, your secondary bronchus, your tertiary bronchus, and those tubes get smaller and smaller and smaller, so more air can get distributed out the lungs. So it can be easy for gas exchange. But that's the primary bronchus. That's the main division of the trachea. Okay. And if you look at it, you see the right bronchus is kind of straight. The left bronchus is kind of bent. So if you have a patient and they aspirate something, like you work on a patient, they have a gold crown and it disappears. Okay. You got to get an X-ray, make sure it didn't go into the lungs, because the lungs can be fatal infection. Okay. Which lung is it going to look, which lung would you look for it in, the right lung or the left lung? Look at the angle of those tubes. Which one is the most likely going to go down?
Right lung.
The right lung. The right lung is a straight shot. Look how the right bronchi comes down. It's a straight shot from the trachea. The left one's bounced off at an angle. So chances are you need to get an X-ray of the right lung. That's where you're going to look for it first. Let's see if you can find it. So most of the time, if a patient aspirates an object, a kid with a penny or whatever they're going to aspirate, okay, it's going to go into the right lung. That's where you're going to look first because of the angle of those primary bronchi as it comes down. Posterior intercostal veins between the ribs, posterior intercostal arteries. Remember, arteries and veins run together. The diaphragm, the liver, and the gallbladder. The stomach, and the inferior vena cava coming up towards the heart. Now the heart and lungs have been removed here, but that's the inferior vena cava coming up. Okay, so below the diaphragm, everything comes through the inferior vena cava. Above it, the superior vena cava. The spleen, you see on the side here for the maintenance of red blood cells. The esophagus is that tube that gets squished and it runs distal to the trachea. The trachea is in front of the esophagus as it comes down into the thorax, the thoracic cavity. Intercostal nerves, the vagus nerve again, the 10th cranial nerve, the aorta, okay, with the heart missing there. You can see the aortic arch, and you can see the descending aorta. Okay, as it descends down, that's called the thoracic aorta above the diaphragm, and it's called the abdominal aorta below the diaphragm. The common carotid artery. You can see that the left common carotid branches off the aorta. Subclavian vein, subclavian artery, and the internal jugular vein. All right. Again, thoracic cavity. You can see the common carotid artery. Okay, it's kind of hard to learn. This is your aorta right here. It is the aortic arch and the descending aorta there. The brachiocephalic trunk, the first branch off the aortic arch. Ligamentosus arteriosum, that binds the aorta to the vesicles of the heart, kind of holds it stabilized in place with all that pumping that goes through there and doesn't allow the aorta to be displaced. The pulmonary trunk, the left primary bronchus, the esophagus. Let's give you the esophagus there. Hemiazygous vein, the inferior vena cava coming up, and the vagus nerve as it comes along the side there. Okay, and goes down towards the heart. And the subclavian artery, okay, the sympathetic trunk for your sympathetic nervous system, posterior intercostal veins, the accessory hemiazygous vein, intercostal nerves, communicating rami as they branch off, the posterior intercostal arteries, and the splenic nerves as they come down. All right, let's finish. Everybody's tired with the time change, huh? Messes everything up. All right, left coronary artery and right coronary artery. Those are the two main arteries that supply blood to the heart. Okay, this is the right side of the heart. This is the left side of the heart. So this artery right here, this big thick one here, this is the left coronary artery and the right coronary artery. The left atrium, the superior vena cava, aorta, the right atrium, the right coronary artery, you said, the marginal arteries go down the side, the bottom, the interventricular arteries, the left ventricle, the right ventricle, the pulmonary trunk, the great cardiac vein. It feeds up into the cavernous sinus. The circumflex artery, that's one that wraps around the heart, and the pulmonary vein. This is the left pulmonary vein. All right, one more, and then we'll take a break until 8 o'clock. Let's do this one. All right, these are the lungs. We haven't done the lungs yet in class, but we have a superior lobe, a middle lobe, and an inferior lobe. Okay. You have the bronchus. Remember, the bronchus are the openings that branch off the trachea. They get smaller and smaller and smaller as you can travel through the lungs until they actually get to the alveoli, which are really tiny. You have the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein. You see that white thing in the middle right here? That is the bronchi. So pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, inferior lobe, superior lobe, middle lobe, and then the bronchus, which are your connecting tubes from the trachea. Abdominal cavity now. Okay, we're still looking at this. This is the splenic artery. It's going to feed into the spleen. This is the greater omentum. This is that sheet of fascia with fat that hangs down from the greater curvature of the stomach, which is the lower portion of it. You have the transverse colon. We haven't got the digestive tract yet, but we will. The transverse colon is a part of the colon, the part of the large intestine that goes transverse across the body. You got the common hepatic artery, feeds into the liver. You got the gastroduodenal artery for the duodenum. You got the marginal artery. You see it feeds around and curves around the outside, around the entire part of the large intestine there. You got the middle colic artery. You got the right colic artery. You got your ascending colon. That's the part going up. You got an ascending, transverse, and a descending. Kind of just like the aorta. Okay. You have the ileocolic artery. You have the small intestine, which wraps around from the tip of the end of the stomach. The end of the stomach's right up here. Okay, the stomach feeds into the small intestine, and everything wraps around the small intestine. The small intestine is longer than the large intestine, but it's thinner. The small intestine has 3 divisions: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, in that order. When it gets to the ileum, it goes into the large intestine. Okay, and we'll go with that when we go to the digestive system. You have the superior mesenteric vein. You have the sigmoid colon. So as the colon goes, you have the ascending, you have the transverse, you have the descending. The descending goes into the sigmoid colon, which then feeds into the rectum. Sigmoid colon just means it's S-shaped. You have intestinal arteries surrounding all the small intestines for absorption of minerals and nutrients. You have the superior mesenteric artery. You have the inferior mesenteric artery. You have the splenic vein, I'm sorry. And you can see the spleen all the way on the left side of the body. And there's your spleen. And then you can see the descending column in front of that. And then you can see that kind of sausage-shaped organ, which is your pancreas. Okay. It has a head, a body, and a tail for the pancreas. All right. Hey, we haven't gotten to the digestive system yet, but we will in the next couple of chapters. And the same thing here. You have the common hepatic artery feeding into the liver. You have the gastroduodenal artery. You have the small intestine. You have the pancreas. You have the left renal vein, feeds into the left kidney. You have the aorta. Again, this is an abdominal aorta. It is below the diaphragm. You got the testicular artery. You got the, I can't really see that one. There it is. The inferior vena cava as it comes up. You have the ascending colon. Okay, that's what's the beginning of the large intestine. You got the common iliac arteries, which branch off the abdominal aorta, the right and left iliac arteries. Then you got the cecum. The cecum is the first part of the large intestine. That's where the ileum of the small intestine enters into. And the cecum is attached to the posterior part of the cecum is your appendix. And there's a little projection right there. The little tiny projection off the cecum. And the cecum feeds into your large intestine, into your ascending colon. The sigmoid colon, again, is the S-shape after the descending colon. The superior rectal artery, okay, innervates the rectum. The sigmoid artery, okay, X-shaped artery. You can see the blue area right there behind there. The inferior mesenteric artery. The interior mesenteric vein. The descending colon. The testicular vein, runs right next to the testicular artery. The left colic artery. The splenic vein. The marginal artery. The splenic artery. And the transverse colon running across. All right, up the upper abdominal cavity. See the heart laying on top of the diaphragm. This is the apex of the heart, the very tip right here. This is the diaphragmatic side, and this is the base of the heart up on top. You see the right lung. You see the diaphragm. controls the space of the right lung as it contracts. The hepatic portal vein feeding into the liver. You can see the liver there, that huge object there, huge organ. You see the bile duct. This is where the gallbladder excretes bile into. The bile duct connects to the liver and bile gets transported down that and either goes into the small intestine, the duodenum, or it backs up into the gallbladder where it's stored. The gallbladder does not produce bile. The gallbladder is simply a storage unit. That's why you can function fine without it. All it does is store and modify bile. It does not produce it. Bile is produced in the liver. If you don't need it, it goes backed up and goes into the bile duct for later use. Okay, there's the liver. Okay, the proper hepatic artery feeds into the liver. The right gastroepiploic artery. The gastroduodenal artery. The common hepatic artery. The greater omentum comes off the greater curvature of the stomach. And you hear the stomach's kind of been split open there, so you can see it better. There's your stomach. It's kind of been filleted open a little bit. The splenic artery, because here's your spleen right here next to it. There's your spleen. It gets on the left side of the body against the lateral wall. The left gastric artery above the stomach, and the left lung. Go a little deeper. Go a little deeper. There we go. And you have your liver. Okay, the large organ. You have the diaphragm, mushroom shape, goes across the entire pelvic abdominal cavity there. You have the common hepatic artery feeding the liver. You got the stomach that's been pulled out of the way, reflected. But it's still right there. You got your gallbladder, big green thing right there, just below the liver. You got the gastroduodenal artery. You have the right gastroepiploic artery. And you have your pancreas. And the tip of the pancreas almost points to the spleen. And the other end points to the small intestine, the duodenum and small intestine. The superior mesenteric artery, the greater omentum, the splenic vein, and the spleen. You can see the splenic artery above that, and the left gastric artery, the stomach. All right. Okay, back to the thoracic cavity and the pelvic cavity. Again, up to the neck, you have the common carotid artery, feeding on both sides along the trachea. You have the subclavian artery. You got the celiac trunk. You got the renal artery feeding into the kidneys. You got the kidneys. When you look above that, you can see the adrenal glands above the kidneys, the suprarenal glands. You have the inferior vena cava coming up to the right atrium. You have the testicular artery branching down both sides. You have the inferior mesenteric artery, the common iliac arteries, okay, both branching off the aorta, at the end of the aorta. You got the femoral vein and femoral artery. You got the external iliac vein. You got the testicular vein, the external iliac artery, the internal iliac artery. And you see the thoracic aorta. You see the ureter. The ureter is a tube that connects the filtrate from the kidney going into the urinary bladder. So to go from the kidney to the urinary bladder, after the filtration for the urine, it goes through the ureter. Those are those two tubes there. And it feeds into the back of the urinary bladder. You see the urinary bladder right at the base here. It's right there. There's your urinary bladder where the circle is. Okay. Your renal vein, superior mesenteric artery. Okay. Your esophagus. Again, the only reason you see the esophagus is because the trachea, the lungs have been cut away. So you cut away the lungs at the primary bronchi. the esophagus fits distal or dorsal to the trachea. Brachiocephalic trunk, again, the first branch off the aortic arch. Okay, here's the kidneys. And we haven't gotten into this yet, but we will. This is the renal cortex. Really has a cortex and a medulla, cortex on the outside, medulla's on the inside. The renal is called pyramids. Those little areas at the tip of each of these sections on the kidney. You have a minor calyx where the filtrate feeds into, and it feeds into a major calyx. The major calyx goes into the renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis goes into the ureter. Ureter carries it down to the urinary bladder. Urinary bladder goes through the urethra and then out through the external sphincter, external urethral sphincter. And here, this is what's called the hilum, where you have your renal artery and your renal vein coming into and going out of the kidney. Okay, in the pelvic region, you have the common iliac artery. So we can get that to highlight there. There we go. You have your internal iliac artery and the external iliac artery. You have the umbilical artery. It's obliterated here a little bit on the umbilical artery there. You have the superior vesicular artery, the obturator artery, the ductus deferens. We haven't got into the male reproductive system or the female, but we will. And all these will come right back to you. The urinary bladder, the ureters feed on that, and then the urethra feeds out of that. The pubic symphysis, where the bone comes together at the pelvic joint. You have the prostate gland. The urethra runs right through the prostate gland, right between it. So here's your urinary bladder, and there's the urethra, that line going right through the prostate gland. Here's your prostate gland. You have the penis, you have the testes, you have the urethra. Okay, in the female, there's only a urethra. In the male, there's 3 parts. Okay, there's a prostatic urethra, a membranous urethra, and a spongy urethra. We'll go through all 3 of those as we get into that chapter. You have the rectum, which is just after the sigmoid colon, that feeds into the anus. You have the seminal vesicle, which is one of the glands that help produce semen. You have the inferior vesicular artery. You have the internal pudendal artery. You have the inferior gluteal artery. You have the lateral sacral artery. You have the superior gluteal artery and the ureter. Again, the ureter feeds from the kidney to the urinary bladder. Okay. In the hand, you have the cephalic vein on the radial side. You have the superficial branch of the radial nerve. You have the dorsal venous network on the top of the foot, on top of the hand, I'm sorry. You got your basilic vein running along the ulnar side, where the ulnar nerve runs. And you got the dorsal branch of the ulnar nerve. On the upper limb, you see the deltoid muscle, which we talked about extensively. If we went in doubt, just circle deltoid muscle. You have the latissimus dorsi on the sides. You have the brachial fascia, which helps protect the flexors in the upper anterior part of the arm. You have the median cubital vein. The median cubital vein is the one you go after when you're doing you're going for an IV. Okay. When you have the sock in the elbow there, that median vein is that one that pops up. That's when you typically get the IV in, is a median cubital vein. Then the antebrachial fascia goes around the muscles and help protect them. Another fascial layer. Then you have the lateral antebrachial cutaneous nerve and the palmar aponeuroses. Aponeuroses are what?
Muscle to muscle.
Perfect. Connect muscle to muscle. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Aponeuroses connect muscle to muscle. Okay. Palmaris brevis muscle in the wrist. And going back up, we have the medial antebrachial cutaneous nerve. We have the basilic vein running right by the basilic artery there. We have the serratus anterior muscle, the pectoralis major muscle. Below that, you have the pectoralis minor, and the cephalic vein. All right, upper part of the arm, we have the biceps brachii muscle. Okay, this is a flexor muscle. It decreases the angle between the two bones. Okay, you have the basilic vein that runs down the ulnar part of the arm. The lateral antebrachial cutaneous nerve runs down the radial side of the arm. The cephalic vein, the abductor pollicus brevis muscle. Again, so the pollicus is the thumb, and abductor means to pull away from the body. So if here's your thumb, this is abduction. And you can see where the muscle is attached to the outside of the thumb here. So as it pulls, as it contracts, it does that separation. So that's abduction. That's abduction. This is an abductor muscle, pollicus. So abduction of the thumb, short muscle. That's what the whole abductor pollicus brevis means. The palmar aponeurosis, again, the muscle-muscle connections in the palm of the hand. The abductor digiti minimi muscle. Minimi is the little finger. Abductor means to pull away from the other fingers, away from the midline. Okay, so that's the abdomen. You see where it attaches on the outside ridge. So when it contracts, it pulls that little finger away from the other ones. That's abduction. Palmaris brevis muscle. Okay, palmaris longus tendon. Antebrachial fascia, again, surrounds the lower part of the arm to help protect it. And the triceps brachii muscle. Okay, that's on the posterior part of the upper arm. Those are extensor muscles. Okay, in the hand, the flexor carpi radialis muscle, palmaris longus tendon, the radial artery, the superficial palmar branch of the radial artery, the common digital nerves, the common digital arteries, the proper digital arteries between the fingers, the proper digital branches of the median nerve, the proper digital branches of the ulnar nerve, the superficial palmar arch, the ulnar nerve as it comes down, the ulnar artery, and the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. There's a lot of muscles we've gone over before. And now you have the blood supply that goes with them. Okay. Your axillary artery, you can see where it runs. The pectoralis minor muscle. Again, the pectoralis major has been removed. You can see the pectoralis minor. The axillary vein, with the blood coming back into the heart, into the superior vena cava, into the right atrium. Musculocutaneous nerve. The brachial vein. The brachial artery. The radial artery. The ulnar artery. And the median nerve, one that goes right in between the radius and the ulnar. The superficial palmar branch of the radial artery, and the superficial palmar arch, as the blood goes around the arch of the hand. The ulnar nerve is on the little finger side. The pronator teres muscle, below the elbow. Latissimus dorsi, okay, back muscles. Coracobrachialis muscle helps aid the biceps in flexing. The subclavian vein, and right next to me the subclavian artery, and the anterior scalene muscles going up the neck. All right, up in the shoulder again. We have the thoracoacromial trunk. There's a branch there. The axillary artery, the subscapular artery, the anterior humeral circumflex artery, the posterior humeral circumflex artery, the deep artery of the arm, muscular branches of the brachial artery, as it branches off, the brachial artery, radial artery, going on the thumb side again, and the ulnar artery, going on the inner part, the medial part of the arm, forearm. Then you have your median nerve running right in between, your ulnar nerve, and the subclavian artery, below the clavicle. You have the brachiocephalic trunk, the first branch off the aortic arch. the common carotid artery, going up the side of the neck, the external carotid artery, and the internal carotid artery. Okay. A little different angle at looking at it. Anterior portion, you got the subclavian artery. You got the thoracoacromial artery. You see the loop that it makes there. You got the axial artery, just above the subclavian. You got the subscapular artery, above that. You have the deep artery of the arm and the brachial artery as it goes across. You have muscular branches of the brachial artery as it innervates into the different muscles. Again, the brachiocephalic trunk, the first vessel to branch off the aortic arch. The thyroid gland, which sits anterior to the trachea. The common carotid artery, on both sides of the neck. The superior thyroid artery, innervating the thyroid. The external carotid artery. The submandibular gland, the salivary gland under the mandible. And then you see the facial artery coming up the side. It's a convoluted artery. All right, lower limb, you got the femoral artery, femoral vein, I'm sorry. You got the inguinal lymph node. We'll do lymph nodes I think our next chapter. The lateral femoral cutaneous nerve. The superficial fibular nerve. The dorsal venous arch. The saphenous nerve as it goes up the leg. The anterior cutaneous branch of the femoral nerve, the greater saphenous vein, ilioinguinal nerve, and the superficial inguinal ring. That little ring forms that little opening where the testes descend down through the inguinal ring during development. All right, posterior leg. You can see the blood vessels here. You see on the back side here, distal side, you have the small saphenous vein, okay? And you have the sural nerve, and you've got calcanean tendon, which is also known as Achilles tendon. Okay, the top part, or the ventral, the dorsal part of the foot, you got the greater saphenous vein that drains it, going back up. You got the saphenous nerve and the deep fibular nerve. Okay. Then you have your dorsal venous arch where the blood forms a return back up towards the heart. Branches of the sural nerve. The small saphenous vein on the opposite side and the superficial fibular nerve. Okay, still on the foot, you have the tibialis anterior muscle. You have the extensor hallucis longus muscle. Again, it extends the hallucis with the big toe. So you can see where the muscle attaches, it's at the very top of it. So when you flex it, when you contract the muscle, that nerve, that toe extends. Okay, an extensor retinaculum goes along the ankle, and the extensor digitorum longus muscle, okay, extends the digits. The dorsal pedis artery coming down, the anterior tibial artery, the anterior tibial vein, which runs right next to it, and the deep fibular nerve. Okay, and we have the do we just do this one? Did it move? Not yet. We just did that one. There we go. Since it didn't freeze up. All right. Now we have the tensor fascia latae muscle. You can see where that's located. The sartorius muscle that's been cut. Remember, the sartorius muscle is one that goes down and wraps around and allows you to cross your legs. That's a sartorius muscle that pulls out legs one over the other. The femoral nerve, muscular branch of the femoral artery. The femoral artery come down, branch into the muscles. The femoral vein and the tributary, what it connects to, going back up towards the heart. The femoral artery, the vastus intermedius muscle, the vastus lateralis muscle, on the lateral side of it, the quadriceps femoris tendon, and the patella, the kneecap. The vastus medialis muscle in between those, the rectus femoris muscle, you can see where it's been cut also, the top parts of above it, the adductor longus muscle, okay, adductor brings the leg in back towards the midline, gracilis muscle, adductor brevis muscle, again, adducts the leg, the spermatic cord feeds into the testes, the inguinal ligament, which connects the testes to the inguinal canal where they came down through, and the inferior epigastric artery, and the rectus abdominis. Those are your six-pack muscles. You can see they've been cut here and reflected. Okay, up in the thigh, you have the femoral nerve, the femoral artery, where that feeds down. And then you get muscular branches of the artery, so that branches into the different muscles and provides your blood supply. The rectus femoris, again, has been sectioned, and the quadriceps femoris tendon that connects your quadriceps to your patella. The vastus medialis muscle, the serratorius muscle, that's been cut also, the adductor magnus muscle, the adductor hiatus, the gracilis muscle, the adductor longus muscle, your femoral vein right next to your femoral artery, the deep femoral artery, the spermatic cord, and the inguinal ligament. All right, this is the posterior limb, a lateral, side view, lateral view of it. This is a superior gluteal artery, the piriformis muscle. Then you have your inferior gluteal vein and your inferior gluteal artery. The semitendinosus muscle. Then you have your tibial nerve, you can see there, dissected open. You can see the tibial nerve, the plantaris muscle, and the soleus muscle. The gastrocnemius muscle has been cut, so you can see up below it, and the calcaneal tendon, your Achilles tendon. The popliteal artery is the artery behind the kneecap. The common fibular nerve runs behind the kneecap also, and the popliteal vein right next to the popliteal artery behind the kneecap. Biceps femoris muscle allows for flexing of the leg. The sciatic nerve runs all the way down the leg. The superior gluteal nerve and the superior gluteal vein. Let's go a little deeper. All right. You have the superior gluteal artery again, the semitendinosus muscle, popliteal artery, popliteal vein behind the kneecap, posterior tibial artery, and the fibular artery. And you also have the tibial nerve. You have the common fibular nerve. You have the biceps femoris muscle. And then you see the sciatic nerve. See how thick that nerve is and how far it dries down? That's why you don't want to hit that nerve when you're doing an injection in the gluteus maximus muscle. You want to avoid the sciatic nerve at all costs. Okay? And the piriformis muscle. All right. You have your superior gluteal nerve, the superior gluteal vein, and the superior gluteal artery all run together. The gluteus medius is below the gluteus maximus. That's been, gluteus maximus has been reflected, and the gluteus medius has been cut to see the arteries and veins underneath there. The piriformis muscle, gemellus superior muscle, the obturator internus muscle, and the gemellus inferius muscle. Again, and this is a real good view of the sciatic nerve. Look how thick that sciatic nerve is. That runs through there. Major nerve. I want to avoid that at all costs for any kind of damage. Doing injections in that area. Quadratus femoris muscle on the sides there of the sciatic nerve. That's a perfect picture of that sciatic nerve. You see that huge thing. All right. The semitendinosus muscle. You can see the marker there. The popliteal artery. The semimembranosus muscle. The poplitealus muscle. The posterior tibial artery. And the tibial nerve. And then the fibularis muscle. And the fibularis longus muscle. And the fibular artery, the common fibular nerve, the biceps femoris muscle, and the popliteal vein. Again, the popliteal artery, the popliteal nerve, artery, vein, and nerve all run right behind the kneecap. Remember, arteries, nerves, and veins all run together. All right, top of the foot. All right, abductor hallucis muscle. You can see your muscle attaches to the outside of the hallux, the big toe. And when you contract it, it's going to move the big toe away from the other toes. So it's an abductor hallucis muscle. Medial plantar artery, medial plantar nerve, the common digital artery, going each of the digits of the foot, and the common digital nerve. The flexor hallucis longus tendon. Okay, it's on the top of the toe. It allows the toe to flex. It allows you to bend the toe. The proper digital artery between the digits and the proper digital nerve goes between each digit. The flexor digitorum brevis flexes the digits. Flexor digitorum longus tendon. Lumbrical muscle. The abductor digital mini-me muscle pulls the little toe away from the other toes. Quadratus plantae muscle. The lateral plantar artery and the lateral plantar nerve. Okay. There's a lot of information in that lab, a whole lot. So let's do the quiz. Like I said, I'm not worried about the real tiny little areas, but the major ones you do need to know. So what vessel is highlighted there?
Great cardiac vein.
How do we know that? Because we know this is the right coronary artery. This is the left coronary artery. Okay, this is the superior vena cava. So on the left is a great cardiac vein. So according to logic, this should be the right answer, right? And it is. Perfect. All right. What artery is highlighted right here? Where does it look like it's going to on the skull up here? What region?
Temporal.
Occipital. I'd say it'd be the occipital artery. Perfect. What vessel is highlighted? I would say that looks like it's cut pretty deep in there.
The deep fibular nerve.
Yeah, so I would say that'd be a good guess. The deep fibular nerve. Nope. Anterior tibial artery. I would not expect you guys to get that.
It said vessel, so.
Oh, okay. So it wouldn't be the nerve, yeah. It had to be the anterior tibial artery. It does say which vessel is highlighted. You're right. Which vein is highlighted? So now we better not pick an artery here.
Femoral.
Okay, looks at the femoral vein coming back up. Oh, the greater saphenous vein. The femoral vein runs from the femur. The greater saphenous vein extends all the way down the entire foot. So that's the greater saphenous vein. Which artery is highlighted? Okay, I really can't see much of it. The superior rectal, no. Left colic, could be. Sigmoidal, no. Inferior mesenteric, I'd say it's really hard. That's just a little blue dot in there. I mean, like I said, when you get to the test, I will show you detailed pictures that you can't mistake it, that you'll know what it is. Inferior mesenteric or left colic. Let's go with the superior rectal. I don't know how that's feeding into the rectum. That's just too hard to tell. All right, that would be the, which artery is highlighted? That's just below the stomach.
Splenic.
And it looks like it's feeding into the spleen. The splenic. Yep. And the top part of the foot. So which vein is highlighted? Central dorsal venous arch. Okay. I always had a greater saphenous vein coming up because the arch is right here where the arch, you see the arch here. And the accessory runs on the side. So I would say the greater saphenous vein. And what artery is highlighted there?
Superior gluteal.
Superior gluteal. Let's try that one. Lateral sacral artery.
I'm gonna say that one.
Was that?
I was gonna say that one, but I didn't want to get it wrong.
Okay, you can say it. You can take a guess because like some of these you really can't tell from how they're situated here. All right, what vein is highlighted? You know it's not the median cubital because that goes across the fossa there. You do your IV draws.
Brachial.
Brachial should be a little higher up, more superior.
Basilic.
Probably the basilic. The basilic runs along the ulnar nerve. Basilic. Oh, I didn't select it. We were right, but I didn't click the button. It's the basilic nerve. All right. And this is what arteries are highlighted here? It looks like, it looks like this is the thoracic aorta coming down and splitting into your iliac arteries.
Yeah, the iliac. Common iliac or external
iliac, right?
and
Which one?
the external and internal.
Iliac.
Is what I'm gonna go with.
Okay. Common iliac. 50-50 chance. But the question's worded funny because it said which arteries, plural. Common iliac is one artery.
Mm-hmm. That's
The
what
external
throws
internal
people
iliac
off
are
too.
two. So it's worded wrong. So you're right, Ashley. It is worded wrong. All right, so what veins are highlighted here?
Subclavian.
Yeah, I was gonna say subclavian.
Subclavian, okay. The axillary. Subclavian runs just below the axillary. They're really hard to distinguish between the two. It's kind of hard because I can't see the axillary and the subclavian in the same picture. So I can't compare them. So yeah, like I said, that's the axillary, but it could have been the subclavian artery they're looking at also. And this is what vessel here. Again, that's your corpus callosum. This is your phalanx for your limbic system. This is running on the sides here. So this could be the anterior cerebral, the straight sinus, the internal carotid, or the inferior sagittal sinus. This is kind of your sinus. This is your sinus right up in here, right? The sinus and the straight. I would say inferior sagittal sinus. No, anterior cerebral artery. Up in this the cerebrum. So that's your anterior cerebral artery. What artery is highlighted here?
Facial.
Facial artery. Perfect. 14, which artery is highlighted? Common carotid, brachiocephalic trunk, subclavian, right coronary.
Common carotid.
Yeah, because it looks like it's coming off right back in here. It's kind of hard to see where it's coming off of, but common carotid. Yep. Perfect. Which artery is highlighted? What's the one that hangs out of the diaphragmatic side of the heart? Well, do process of elimination. Anterior ventricular goes between the ventricles. Here's the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So the anterior ventricular will be this right here. The interventricular, I'm sorry. The marginal could be. Circumflex runs around the heart up the top. The right coronary is this one here. That's the right coronary and left coronary. So the only one left is the marginal. Marginal artery run around the base of the diaphragmatic base of the heart. So that should be your marginal arteries. 16, what vein is highlighted? It's kind of hard to see where that's going. Let's see if I can get it better.
Subclavian veins.
It feeds up to that. I see the right, because it looks like it's going to feed right into the superior vena cava. Because here's the heart. I'd say the brachiocephalic vein, but subclavian, interjugular. It looks like brachiocephalic, right and left. That's what it looks like. Yeah. Okay. Because you notice they're going to feed right into the superior vena cava, right into the right atrium. And the superior vena cava is made up of the left and right brachiocephalic veins. All right, the highlighted vessel forms an anastomosis with the what artery of the greater curvature of the stomach? The highlighted vessel forms an anastomosis with what artery? The left gastric, the splenic, the left gastroeploic, or the gastroduodenal?
Splenic.
The spleen's way over here,
Oh yeah.
but the duodenum's right here, where the tip of the pancreas is. So gastroduodenal would be a good guess. Nope, but it's the left gastroepiploic. The left gastric epiploid from the stomach. Okay. From which large artery does a highlighted artery branch?
The deep femoral.
The deep femoral. And the branches from the popliteal. And the deep femoral runs next to it. So that branch from the popliteal artery. Like I said, we haven't really gone through all of these yet. Okay, back to the head and neck again. The highlighted vessel is a branch of which artery?
External carotid.
Let's find out. This is the inferior alveolar. All right, let's see where we're branching from. Superficial, external carotid, internal carotid, or facial? Which did you say?
External carotid.
More carotid? Could be coming from that area. It looks close to there. Perfect. Good. The external carotid. And last one, the highlighted vessel drains into the, what are we highlighted here?
Right atrium.
What vessel is it?
Looks like the superior vena cava.
Okay. That drains into the right atrium. Perfect. All right.